Hello, this is Anthony Gorhan for Teacher Training Unplugged Radio. Welcome. Now, I thought it might be interesting to share how I think I've developed over my career as a teacher. Try and pin down for you and for myself some key opportunities I've had or made for myself, directions I've taken, things I haven't done, and present this not by way of example, but simply by way of I don't know really. You decide. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then I'll begin. I finished university in summer 1995. I studied English language and literature, and I had studied that because my intention always had been to become an English teacher. A few years later I went to university and I studied English language and literature. And one of the optional modules you could choose at my university at the time was linguistics. And I thought, excellent. So I signed up for that, and I quit that module within 2 weeks because I couldn't get my head around the noun phrase. Now, in retrospect, I realized what I couldn't get my head around was the way that this subject was being presented and taught by the lecturer. But at the time, I totally thought it was my problem, and that I was unfit for studying this area. So I gave up. 3 years later, after my finals were finished, there was an opportunity to take a short 4-week initial training course over the summer. It was modelled on courses like the CELTA or the Trinity Cert TESOL, but it was a kind of a bargain basement version that the university was running in collaboration with a local training college. And during the 4 weeks, one of the things I learned was that I really wasn't as competent at things as I liked to think I was. I wasn't as competent at learning languages. We had foreign language lessons in Russian and I was incredibly bad. I wasn't as good as I thought I'd be at class management. I wasn't as good as I thought I'd be at instructions. I wasn't as good as I thought I'd be at explaining language. In fact, I wasn't as good as I thought I'd be at more or less everything to do with teaching. Now, that didn't put me off, but it did give me pause for thought. And I think that realization quite early on that I wasn't as good as I thought I was very important in my own sense of development. Until you have a reality check, you'll never know exactly what you can do and what you can't do. But once you do have it, you know where you stand, and then you can start to work. So I remember when I got my first job, just after the new year in 1996. It was in a language school in central London. I won't name it. It doesn't exist anymore anyway. But I remember taking my first classes, and they were exam preparation classes. And this was an extremely fortunate way to begin teaching for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that exam preparation is extremely systematic and organized. It's also got a very clear deadline by which all the work needs to be done, and there are very clear parameters about what equals success. In other words, what do the candidates for the exam need to be able to do and how well in order to pass. As a teacher, if you know what those are and you can find ways to work towards them, then you've got a chance to help your students in a very concrete way. I found this instantly attractive and was naively undaunted by the risk of not preparing these students adequately and therefore being partially responsible for their failure. I didn't give that a second's thought. Yes, I was that kind of late teenager. Or 20-something-year-old actually by this point. Anyway, I digress. Back to the story. I taught exam preparation, first certificate, Cambridge Advanced, and proficiency every day, 5 days a week, for 10-week courses for a year and a half. For most of that year and a half, I taught 2 of those 3 classes a day, and for some of the year, I taught all 3 of those in one day. Again, 5 days a week for 10 weeks. And each lesson was 3 hours long. Yes, you heard that right, 3 hours long. Every day, 10 weeks, same people. So, what did this teach me? One thing it taught me was efficient, focused planning. I had very little time to plan. Luckily, the materials for exam preparation even then were very good. And I learned a huge amount by learning to work with the materials given. I had very little other choice. I had hardly any time and very little experience. I took what they said on trust, but I tried to make it work as best I could. Another thing exam preparation taught me was a great deal about language. By doing the activities that my students were being asked to do for the exam, I had to work out how English worked, what you could do with it, what you couldn't do with it, and I had to learn it quickly, and I had to learn it in the same terms that my learners were learning it. That was a great advantage when I look back on it. One of the things I made a habit of doing was whenever I set a mock exam or a mock paper, a mock question for my students, I would always do it myself while they were doing it, and my goal was to get 100% and to increase the difference in time between my completing it and their completing it. Now at first certificate, this isn't that difficult after a while, but when you get up to proficiency, that can be quite a challenge. And this challenge, this regular weekly challenge I set myself, forced me to keep inquiring about language, keep learning about how the exam worked, and to keep expanding my knowledge of English and test questions. So by the time that year and a half went by, I think I was pretty well schooled in exam preparation at a wide range of levels, and I'd learned a great deal about English into the bargain. It was at that point I went back to university to study for my state teacher training. I'll skip over this quite quickly because it wasn't an especially good idea in retrospect, but it did teach me 1 or 2 things. One thing it taught me was the real need for strong, clear, robust classroom management. I'll leave it at that. Anyone who's worked in high school will know exactly what I'm talking about. Working in the private sector with biddable, well-meaning young adults, classroom management really wasn't something that I ever had to worry about. As soon as I started working with 11 to 16-year-olds in the inner cities in London, I knew exactly how important it was. So, one developmental benefit that taking my PGCE gave me was a chance to learn or relearn basic teacher skills. So for that at least I'm grateful. I worked in high schools for a year or so and then moved to Germany and back into adult private language teaching. And going back into the classroom, that kind of classroom, after a break of a year or so, was a real shock. I always thought that teaching would be rather like riding a bicycle. You never forget. And in a sense you don't, but you can get very wobbly very quickly if you don't keep your hand in. And I hadn't. So, for the first several months, I was really back at square one. Lesson planning took ages, finding materials took ages, classroom management, I was used to groups of 30 or 40, and now suddenly I had 4 or 6 people. Very different. Learning about how to work with a team of colleagues. I was team teaching on intensive courses again. In fact, it was something I'd never done. I had to learn how to collaborate with people, communicate with people. So going back into a previously familiar environment, or into a completely new one, whichever way you like to look at it, forces you to reassess everything you do, and it forces you to gain new skills. Having moved up the ranks, so to speak, from classroom teacher to assistant director of studies, to being headhunted to become a teacher trainer, becoming a CELTA teacher trainer, and then ultimately a CELTA assessor, and then a diploma or Delta level tutor for Module 2. At each of these stages that came after 2 or 3 years separated from each other, I was presented with increasing and different challenges. The move from classroom teacher to assistant director of studies forced me to learn managerial skills. The move from assistant director of studies to teacher trainer forced me to learn about how to teach peers. The move from teacher trainer to CELTA teacher trainer confronted me with the problem of dealing with specific requirements for a specific award. In a way, it brought me right back to my beginnings teaching exam preparation, and I think that's why I took to it and why I still really enjoy it. And then the move to diploma level and the move to assessing other CELTA centres forced me to learn appreciation for how other people do things. So to summarise, what are some of the developmental moves that I've gone through? Well, starting from the beginning, learning that I could actually understand language and communicate with people about it. Learning that although I lacked skills, I could gain them through focused effort and intelligent research. Learning that a framework and regularity and repetition in the early stages is extremely useful when taking on new responsibilities. That moving out of my comfort zone was crucial to finding out that what I thought were my limits were not my limits. Returning to previously familiar ground refreshes and reinvigorates your sense of what you can do, what you can't do, and what you've done previously. Working with other people can be extremely awkward, but it forces you to become more flexible and clearer and better organized. Taking on increasing responsibility, and especially taking on managerial or assessment responsibility over others, forces you to deeply question your core values, principles, and biases. And it also forces you to remind yourself frequently that everyone is trying to do their best, including you, and that needs to be valued. And I suppose, having shared all this with you, it's given me a fresh appreciation and a fresh sense of gratitude for the opportunities I've had, and the good luck, the good fortune that I've experienced. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world. This is Anthony Gorton for Teacher Training Unplugged Radio. Bye for now.